Hi everyone, I welcome you back in this video tutorial on Azure VNet NAT, that is Network Address Translation. In this tutorial, we will see what Azure VNet Network Address Translation or a NAT Gateway resource is, what are its features, we'll talk about its limitations, we'll walk you through the steps to deploy the NAT Gateway, and then we will actually jump into the Azure portal to configure one NAT Gateway resource, its virtual network and the subnets, and will run a virtual machine to check its validity as well. So let's begin, guys. So first of all, what is virtual network NAT? It's a Azure service which is fully managed and highly resilient network address translation service from Azure. Now what it does basically, it provides outbound internet connectivity for your subnets or for your virtual machines within those subnets. Once you assign or associate a NAT gateway to your subnet, your NAT gateway will provide that source network address translation or SNAT for that subnet. Now, what SNAT is basically, it rewrites the source of your network flow so that it appears that it is originating from a different IP address and or port. Now, SNAT basically allows us to have multiple compute resources within our private VNet to use the same single public IP address or set of IP addresses if we are using a public IP prefix to connect to the internet. Now these static IPs basically comes from a public IP or public IP prefix, as I said earlier, and NAT gateway will specify which static IP address virtual machine will use when creating outbound flows towards the internet. If we are using a public IP prefix resource from Azure, all IP addresses which are part of that prefix would be consumed by the NAT gateway, and you cannot assign any public IP from that prefix range to any other resource. Your each network gateway can give you up to 50 Gbps of throughput, which can help you to decide your the virtual network design we are using net resources or the NAT gateways. Each single NAT gateway can support up to 64,000 flows for TCP and UDP for a single public IP resource, and 16 such public IPs can be used with a NAT gateway. Once your NAT gateway is configured and assigned to a subnet, all UDP and TCP outbound flows from any of the VMs, let's say for example for this subnet, will use NAT for the internet connectivity. Once you deploy the resource, no further configuration is needed, and we will see in the Azure portal when we start configuring one. And you need not to create any user-defined routes for routing to happen. It is taken care by the NAT resource itself because it's a managed service. Now there's a one point which you see in the red over here. Please remember that the NAT configuration takes precedence over any other outbound scenarios. Let's say if you have configured a public load balancer, and you might have a outbound role configured on the public load balancer, and if you bring a NAT into the picture or NAT into the same scenario, that outbound rule will not be applying to your outbound internet connectivity. The configuration which NAT provides would be given precedence or the preference. So that's something which we need to keep in mind. Now there are certain limitations of NAT, like it's only compatible with standard SKU, and we will see when we start configuring that we cannot pick up basic SKU for the public IP or public IP prefix. And that's the reason if there's any basic resource existing in your subnet, that subnet cannot be configured with NAT. In fact, when we go and look into the portal, you will see that that subnet even will not be available for selection. NAT as of now only supports IP version 4 addresses, and there's no support for IP version 6 addresses. So therefore you cannot deploy the NAT on a subnet which has an IP version 6 prefix. One more thing, your NAT is a virtual network specific resource. What does it mean? That it cannot span multiple virtual networks, but it can span multiple subnets within a virtual network. Now let's see what are the different steps to deploy NAT. First, we need to create a NAT gateway resource, and of course, before that, you need to have a virtual network and a subnet to which this NAT gateway resource is to be assigned. Then this NAT gateway resource would require a public IP address, whether it comes from a single public IP resource or a public IP prefix. Then you need to modify TCP ideal timeout. That is an optional thing. It's between 4 to 120 minutes. Basically, it defines when your NAT gateway has to remove the ideal flows. Then you need to configure your virtual network subnet so that it can use a NAT gateway. There are different ways by which you can assign a NAT gateway. Either you can select a subnet when you are creating a NAT gateway, or you can select a NAT gateway when you are creating a subnet. So it's both the way it is possible. So let's jump into the Azure portal and see how we configure the NAT gateway. Here we are in our Azure portal where we're gonna deploy this NAT gateway, and before we deploy the NAT gateway, we'll create a virtual network. Let's quickly create one. We already have one. We're gonna create the next one. This is my subscription. I'm gonna pick the same virtual network. Or let's give it a name. I'm gonna keep it VNet2 for net. I'm gonna keep it in West US2 this time with West US2. So here we go, West US2. IP addresses, I'm gonna change this IP addressing over. I'm gonna make it 10.2.0.1 /16, and as you can see that it has deleted the default subnet, so I need to create a new subnet. I'm gonna give it a name called my net subnet. I'm gonna give an IP address range that is 10.2.1.0/25. I'm gonna use it. Currently we don't have a NAT gateway, so it's not showing anyone, so just click on add. We'll do it later on once our virtual network is ready. For this demonstration purpose, because I'm gonna demonstrate this with the help of a virtual machine, and I'm not gonna give you that virtual machine a public IP, so I need a Bastion host to log into that virtual machine. If any of you have issue with the I want to learn about virtual VNet Bastion host, we have a separate videos for Bastion host where you can see the configuration detail and what do they do, how we can configure them, what are the different properties. It's all available, and I'll put the description in the link in the description as well. Provide the IP subnet range for your Azure Bastion. Bastion would require a separate subnet, so I'm going to keep it 10.2.20.0/27. That should be good enough for this one. I need to create a public IP to use along with my Bastion host. I'm going to call it Bas PIP2. It is going to be standard SKU as well as a static assignment. Click on OK. Everything else I'm going to keep disabled. Click on tags. All the tags are very important, but I'm skipping for this one because I'm going to delete this virtual network once I'm done with this demonstration. It's going to go for a final validation, and once it is done, we would be able to create a virtual network. Because in this deployment, we're gonna get a Bastion host, so it's gonna take a bit more time rather than a plain virtual network. So let's in the meantime, when our virtual network is getting ready along with the Bastion host, let's quickly create a virtual machine which we're gonna use for this demonstration. So I'm gonna use the Windows virtual machine. In the same subscription, I'm gonna pick the same resource group as well. Give it a name. I'm gonna call it net test VM1, and it should be in the same location where my virtual network is. It's for West US2, and I'm gonna no redundancy needed. I'm gonna pick the standard security type, and I'm gonna go for Windows 2016 server. And once this is done, let's pick the sizing. Hopefully the sizings are available. Let's pick on D series, and that should be good enough, I believe. Click on select, give a username and password, and that username password you would be using to log in through the Bastion host as well, so password should be strong enough. And I'm not allowing any public inbound ports because I'm not going to assign any public IP to it. I'm going to stick with the default in the disk part. If you need to know more about virtual machines, you can watch our previous videos about which have got all the details about your virtual machine or virtual network and the Bastion host as well. Here you need to select the virtual network. So this is VNet2 for net. Now need to select the subnet. The subnet should be the same on which you would be applying or you would be integrating the NAT gateway. I don't want a public IP because we would be using NAT gateway for the outbound flow, and for inbound traffic we will have this, to log into this machine we would be using Bastion host. Currently I'm not going to change any other options here. I'm just removing the public IP option. Click on management, nothing fancy here. I'm going to quickly do that. No tags and review plus create. Once it is passes the final validation, we would be able to create this virtual machine for our demonstration purposes, and it's going to take some time. So it's ready. Let's click on create, and in the background our virtual machine is getting ready for the one. So now we saw that our virtual network along with the Bastion host is ready. So let's go and quickly create the NAT gateway. So you can search for NAT gateways here. Click on NAT gateways and click on it's submitting. So okay, let's go back, click on NAT gateways, let's click on create. We already have NAT gateway 01 which is being deleted as of now. Click on the resource group where you want to place this NAT gateway. Give it a name. I'm going to call it NAT gateway 02. It has to be the same location where our virtual network was, so it was West US2. So here we go, West US2. If you want, you can pick availability zone. If you have availability zone aware resources for your which is being served by this NAT gateway, then you can pick the zones accordingly. You can also set the idle timeout which is the time limit when your NAT gateway will remove the ideal flow. So I'm going to make it 5 minutes. And next you need to pick the outbound IP that would be used for your communications to the outer world. You can use public IP addresses or public IP prefixes. For this one I'm going to use a public IP address. Currently I'm going to call it NAT TIP2. It is going to be standard SKU as well as the assignment would be static. Click on OK. Next, subnet. Now you need to pick your virtual network as well as the subnet to which you will assign this virtual network NAT gateway is. You can assign a single virtual NAT gateway to multiple subnets, but you cannot assign multiple NAT gateways to a single subnet. So you need to remember that, and one NAT gateway can help you to deal with around 50 Gbps of the bandwidth. So accordingly you can do your capacity planning as well. Pick your virtual network and pick your subnet. I'm going to attach this NAT gateway to my NAT subnet. So that is my NAT subnet, and this is where my virtual machine is, which is going to be used to test this virtual network so to this NAT gateway. I'm going to skip the tags part, review and create. Once it done with the final validation, you would be able to create the NAT gateway. So take a couple of seconds and you can create it now. So in the meantime, NAT gateway is getting created. I'll pause the video and come back. So our NAT gateway is ready. Now let's go and log into our virtual machine. So this is my virtual machine. I'm going to connect it to the Bastion host which got created along with that. Click on connect and you can select Bastion here. Provide your username and password. So this is my username and password. Click on connect. So it will connect in the next window of your browser. So it will come here. It's gonna take some time. So here we have logged into our Azure Virtual Machine through Bastion host. Now let's go and check a couple of things on my NAT gateway. This is my NAT gateway 02, and if you look at it here, it has got a one public IP address and it is attached to one subnet. And if I go to outbound IP, this is the IP which I have, that is 20.112.76.5. Now to check that, as I said, NAT gateways are used for the internet outbound network flow. So if I use, let's say, use this, what's my ip.com, let's see what kind of an IP it shows. Public IP. See, so this is my public IP address which is being reflected on the net, that is 20.112.76.5, and that is the exact IP which has been assigned to my NAT gateway. And if you look into my VM, my VM does not have a public IP, so you can see public IP has, it is blank, so there's nothing there. So the VM is getting connected to the internet, or the outbound connectivity to the internet happening to the NAT gateway, and that is being reflected to the public IP. So that was for the NAT gateway, guys.